A chilling pattern exists in military history, one that has utterly dismantled three world powers within the last 600 years. And the critical point is now, in the year 2025. The United States is now mirroring that precise pattern, stage for stage, failure for failure, as if compelled to follow a playbook that has only ever ended in absolute catastrophe. Consider the year 378 AD. Rome possessed the most formidable military machine on the planet. Its legions were deemed invincible, having subjugated 3 continents. No force on earth could withstand their might. But then, at the Battle of Adrianople, a single, catastrophic defeat shattered that illusion. Within a mere 32 years, the city of Rome itself was sacked. The Western Empire crumbled completely, just 70 years after that. The once unbeatable army was reduced to a cautionary tale. Fast forward to 1940. France commanded the largest military force in Europe, protected by the supposedly impenetrable Maginot Line. French commanders confidently declared their military the world's finest. Then, Germany launched its invasion. The myth of French supremacy was obliterated in just 6 weeks. The army, believed to be invincible, suffered a defeat so total, so absolute, that France was transformed into a puppet state almost instantly. Now consider 1979. The Soviet Union stood as a global superpower, armed with nuclear weapons, boasting the largest ground army on the planet and decades of unchallenged military dominance. They invaded Afghanistan, anticipating a conflict lasting mere months. A full 10 years later, they withdrew in utter humiliation. A mere 2 years following that retreat, the Soviet Union itself was no more. That single military failure acted as the catalyst for the empire's complete disintegration. 3 instances, 3 military titans, 3 total collapses, each one adhering to the identical, fatal sequence. And this is the part that must be understood with grave urgency. The United States military, after 80 years of dominating global conflict, is now exhibiting every single one of the warning signs that preceded those 3 historical implosions. We are not at the start of this pattern. We have reached stage 4 of a 6-stage process. This is the precise juncture where the myth of Roman invincibility was shattered. The exact point where the French army was exposed as a hollow shell, and the very stage where the Soviet military's reputation perished in the mountains of Afghanistan. This analysis will reveal how empires lose their critical military advantage, how a formidable reputation can persist long after actual capability has eroded, and why all evidence now indicates that America's moment of reckoning has arrived. But before we dissect the pattern, it is crucial to understand the true nature of military decline, not in abstract theory, but in harsh practice. To comprehend what it truly signifies when a superpower's military capacity fails, the collapse of a military does not begin with a battlefield loss. Its genesis is an internal decay, a hollowing out from within, often masked by budget cuts presented as efficiency. Recruitment shortfalls are dismissed as cultural issues. Equipment verges on obsolescence as procurement grinds to a halt. The quality of training deteriorates as standards are systematically lowered. Initially, this decay is imperceptible. On the surface, nothing appears wrong. The military maintains its global footprint of bases. It still showcases advanced weaponry. Generals continue to deliver confident proclamations, and allies still place their faith in security guarantees. Yet, beneath this veneer, the very foundation is putrefying. And then, the moment of truth arrives, a conflict that starkly exposes the chasm between reputation and reality. It manifests as a defeat that should have been impossible, against an enemy that should have been vanquished. And in that instant, the illusion shatters. The emperor is revealed to have no clothes. From that point, the pattern of collapse accelerates dramatically. Allies begin to hedge their bets. Adversaries start to probe boundaries with increasing boldness. Every security commitment is suddenly cast into doubt. The very military that once underwrote global security transforms into a strategic liability. And the empire, built upon the principle of projecting power, finds itself incapable of doing so. This is not a theoretical exercise. This is the precise fate that befell Rome. France and the Soviet Union. Their downfall occurred because they committed the exact same errors we are committing today. They fell victim to the fatal belief that their military supremacy was permanent. They allowed operational readiness to decay while meticulously maintaining the facade of strength. They critically mistook reputation for actual capability. And the horrifying truth was only recognized when the point of no return had been passed. Let us now analyze how this exact scenario unfolded on 3 separate occasions. We begin with the original blueprint for collapse, Rome, from 350 to 410 AD. For 400 years, the Roman legions were an unstoppable force of conquest. They subjugated Gaul, Britain, Egypt, Judea, Greece, Spain, and North Africa. Any power that dared to challenge Rome was systematically annihilated. The legion represented the pinnacle of military evolution in the ancient world, comprised of professional soldiers, standardized armaments, and unwavering iron discipline, and executed with brilliant tactical precision. By the year 350 AD, Rome's dominion stretched from Scotland to Syria, encompassing 3 continents and 60 million souls. This entire edifice of power rested upon its military might. But beneath this veneer of invincibility, the legions were in a state of terminal decline. The military zenith had been in 117 AD under the Emperor Trajan. By 350 AD, however, it was already 200 years into a long decay, a truth that no one was willing to confront. Internally, the symptoms were undeniable. Rome could no longer compel enough of its own citizens to serve. The foundational system of the Roman legions, built upon citizen soldiers, had irrevocably fractured. Citizenship, once a coveted prize, was now universally granted, a seemingly magnanimous act with catastrophic consequences. But this dilution of identity eviscerated the military's very soul. What incentive remained for a farmer in Egypt to bleed for Rome? In response, Rome took the predictable path of every failing military power. It degraded its standards, turning to outsiders, barbarians, to fill its ranks. Germanic tribes, Goths, Huns, any warrior willing to fight for coin was welcomed. The grim reality by 350 AD was that over half of Rome's legions were comprised of foreign mercenaries, their allegiance bought, not earned, with no true loyalty to the idea of Rome. The quality of their very equipment began to decay. The standardized gear, once the hallmark of legionary effectiveness, became an unaffordable luxury, armor thinned, and the rigorous training that forged soldiers was dangerously abbreviated. Discipline, the bedrock of Roman military might, crumbled. Yet the ghost of Rome's power lingered. The mere reputation of its army was enough. When its standards marched, enemies still broke and fled. The memory of invincibility had become a hollow substitute for actual capability. And then the reckoning arrived. August 9th, 378 AD. At the Battle of Adrianople, the Eastern Roman Emperor Valens confronted a Gothic army in Thrace, the region we now call Turkey. A mere 32 years later, in 410 AD, Alaric the Visigoth sacked Rome itself. The Eternal City, unbreached for 800 years, collapsed in just 3 days. The Western Roman Empire would lurch forward for another 66 years. A corpse, animated by memory, but its military was already dead. By the year 476 AD, Rome was incapable of even fielding a credible army. Control had ceded completely to Germanic warlords. The empire forged by unparalleled military dominance disintegrated because that military had ceased to exist. Here, the pattern crystallizes. A zenith of strength, followed by an internal decay masked by a fearsome reputation. A single catastrophic defeat tears away the veil, exposing the rot. A cascade of failures ensues. The empire ends. Now, let us advance 1,360 years through history. The setting, France, 1940. In the aftermath of the Great War, France possessed what was universally considered the most formidable military in Europe. They had bled Germany to a stalemate over 4 brutal years and had emerged victorious. French generals were lauded as titans. The French army appeared massive, superbly equipped, and battle-hardened. By 1939, their confidence was literally set in concrete with the construction of the Maginot Line, an immense fortress system on the German border, engineered to be impenetrable. French military doctrine was predicated on defense, on a war of attrition, and on the unshakable belief that Germany could never breach their walls. The rest of Europe gazed upon France and saw an invincible bulwark. Great Britain staked its security on French military might. Poland placed its faith in French guarantees of protection. Belgium clung to French assurances of safety. But beneath this veneer of invincibility, the fatal divergence was occurring. The reputation remained, while the actual capability was in a state of precipitous decline. The analysis reveals a fatal flaw. French military doctrine had stagnated, trapped in the past. Their leadership was preparing to refight the last war, World War I. Their entire strategy was anchored to static defense, sluggish mobilization, and the grinding calculus of attrition. They willfully ignored the terrifying new lessons of mechanized warfare. They possessed tanks, but, critically, they dispersed them piecemeal in infantry support roles, failing to concentrate their armored power for a decisive blow. Meanwhile, German military theory had lethally evolved. They conceived of blitzkrieg, lightning-fast, concentrated assaults, with tanks massed into armored divisions, supported by air power, designed to punch through the weakest points of the enemy line and to encircle and annihilate their foes. Its pillars were speed, surprise, and coordination. On paper, France held the advantage. More tanks, more men, more artillery. But this numerical superiority was rendered meaningless by their obsolete tactics and a ponderous command structure and a crippling rigidity of thought. On May 10, 1940, Germany launched its invasion. The world braced itself for another protracted, agonizing war of attrition. Another 4 years mired in the mud of trench warfare, just like the Great War. It took only 6 weeks. Germany simply bypassed the Maginot Line, attacking through the dense Ardennes forest, a route deemed impassable. The French High Command had declared that tanks could never penetrate such terrain. Their assessment was catastrophically wrong. German panzers shattered the lines at Sedan, and the French defenses instantly disintegrated. Within a matter of days, Germany had severed the Allied armies, trapping them. The British were forced into a desperate evacuation from Dunkirk. The French government abandoned Paris. On June 22nd, France capitulated. Just 6 weeks, the army, reputed to be the strongest in Europe, was annihilated in 6 weeks. This was not a mere defeat. It was a total, systemic collapse. The chasm between its reputation and its reality had grown so vast that the moment it was exposed, the entire military institution simply shattered into pieces. And this is the critical point for understanding the repeating pattern. The disaster was not a matter of German technological superiority. France possessed comparable armor and a numerical advantage in manpower. The rot was deeper. France's military doctrine, its training, its very command structure, had decayed from within even as its external reputation remained pristine. For 2 decades, they had been coasting on the fading glory of the First World War. They had come to believe their own mythology. The moment they confronted an enemy that had genuinely innovated, they were forced to confront the terrifying truth that their entire military was obsolete. France would never again reclaim its status as a primary military power. Its liberation came not from its own strength, but at the hands of America and Britain in 1944. But its military prestige was irrevocably destroyed. To this day, France remains a second-tier power, a shadow of the superpower it once was. The pattern repeats, a powerful reputation persisting long after true capability has withered. The first serious test exposes the fatal weakness. The result is immediate, catastrophic collapse. we turn to one final chilling example, the Soviet Union, from 1979 to 1989. On paper, the Soviet war machine of 1979 was an unstoppable behemoth. 5 million soldiers, a terrifying nuclear arsenal, the largest tank force the world had ever seen, and decades of iron-fisted dominance over Eastern Europe. When Soviet tanks rolled into Czechoslovakia in 1968, all resistance was crushed in a single day. The USSR projected an aura of absolute invincibility while America was still reeling from Vietnam and China was a negligible power. The Soviet military was an object of global dread. Then came December 1979 and the fateful decision to invade Afghanistan. The objective appeared deceptively simple: install a compliant communist regime, stabilize the nation, then execute a swift withdrawal within months. It should have been a foregone conclusion. Afghanistan was impoverished, fractured by internal strife, and technologically primitive. The Soviets deployed tanks, helicopter gunships, and modern armaments. The Afghan resistance countered with antiquated rifles. A decade later, the Red Army would retreat in utter humiliation. The butcher's bill was staggering. 15,000 Soviet soldiers dead, hundreds of thousands of Afghans extinguished. The war bled billions, but its true cost was the breaking of the Soviet military. This is the anatomy of its failure. The Soviet military's strength was a facade, a paper tiger. Beneath the surface, it was hollowed out from within. A conscript army meant its ranks were filled with soldiers who possessed no will to fight, and morale had plummeted to catastrophic lows. Substance abuse was endemic. Desertion became a commonplace escape. The officer corps was riddled with corruption, and equipment maintenance was criminally neglected. Into this morass, the Soviets attempted to wage a guerrilla war using rigid, conventional tactics. Their strategy was one of brute force. They leveled villages and occupied cities. Yet the vast, unforgiving countryside remained beyond their grasp. It was here the Mujahideen, secretly funded by America and Pakistan, thrived. The resistance adapted with lethal efficiency. They ambushed supply convoys and brought down helicopter gunships from the sky. They systematically made the cost of occupation unbearable. The Soviet military was trapped in an unwinnable war, and with each passing year, the rot deepened. The conflict became a brutal magnifying glass, exposing every fatal flaw of the Soviet system: endemic corruption, staggering incompetence, and a self-defeating brutality that only created more enemies. Logistical nightmares and a catastrophic failure of leadership sealed their fate. On February 15, 1989, the last Soviet soldier retreated across the bridge out of Afghanistan, marking the end of an illusion. This singular defeat shattered the myth of Soviet military power. The supposedly invincible army had been broken by determined farmers with rifles. The captive nations of Eastern Europe were watching. A critical question was being asked. If the Soviets could not subdue Afghanistan, how could they possibly maintain? The Warsaw Pact disintegrated. By December of 1991, the Soviet Union itself had ceased to exist. Herein lies the pattern. A military's reputation remains intact, masking a deep and fatal internal decay. Afghanistan merely exposed the underlying truth, and a cascade of failures inevitably followed. This is not a unique event. Rome, France, the USSR, three military titans, three eerily similar collapses. All of them followed the exact same lethal sequence. And the chilling reality is, it is happening again. We must break down this pattern, because once you comprehend the 6 stages of decay, you will see with terrifying clarity where the United States stands today. Stage 1. Peak military power. At this point, the military's dominance is absolute and undeniable, built on advanced technology, superior training, and unshakable morale. Recruitment is effortless. The equipment is state-of-the-art. Adversaries actively avoid confrontation, and allies place their faith in security guarantees. This is genuine, tangible strength, not merely a reputation. Consider Rome in 100 AD. France in 1918, the USSR in 1945, and the USA in 1991. Then comes Stage 2, the onset of internal decline. The rot begins subtly, almost imperceptibly. Budget cuts are masked as efficiency improvements. Recruitment stalls. To fill the ranks, standards are quietly lowered. Equipment begins to age, yet its replacement is perpetually delayed as the quality of training erodes. A stifling bureaucracy expands as innovation grinds to a halt. Crucially, these systemic problems are concealed from public view, while the leadership insists that all is well. This was Rome in 250 AD. It was France in 1925, the USSR in 1970, and the USA around 2005. This leads to Stage 3. Reputation outlives reality. The military's formidable reputation persists, acting as a shield for its growing weakness. However, its actual combat capability has significantly degraded. Adversaries still fear the name. Allies still cling to the old guarantees. But behind closed doors, the leadership is acutely aware of the deep-seated problems. Operational readiness is now questionable. Morale is fragile. The chasm between reputation and reality widens daily. We see this in Rome by 370 AD and in France by 1938. The USSR in 1978 and the USA by 2020. Then comes Stage 4, the exposing defeat. The military faces a challenge it is expected to overcome with ease, and it fails spectacularly. This failure, whether a single battle or an entire campaign, serves one purpose. It rips away the veil. The invincible are proven vulnerable. The carefully maintained gap between reputation and reality is brutally exposed for all to see. Allies begin to question security guarantees. Enemies sense an opportunity in the newfound weakness. The reputation, built over decades, dies almost overnight. For Rome, this was Adrianople in 378 AD. For France, it was 1940 and the invasion. For the USSR, the 1989 withdrawal from Afghanistan. For the USA, the 2021 withdrawal from that very same country. This triggers Stage 5, the cascade of failure, as former allies begin to abandon the sinking ship. After that first shocking defeat, others follow in rapid, brutal succession. Each failure is more damaging than the last. Allies hedge their bets. Some defect entirely. Emboldened adversaries begin to test boundaries on every front, and the military, now exposed, finds itself, once an object of terror, becomes an open question. Can they defend anything at all? Its promises of protection evaporate. The empire's sphere of influence recedes with alarming speed. Consider Rome between 400 and 450 AD, subjected to repeated sackings. Or France, post-1940, its imperial grasp irrevocably broken. The Soviet Union, from 1989 to 1991, watching its Eastern European buffer zone disintegrate. This is the sixth stage. The empire's ability to project force is gone. It is over. Its military is now too enfeebled to safeguard its own interests. Foreign outposts are abandoned. Allies defect. Adversaries now operate with impunity. The retreat is absolute, a withdrawal to its own heartland. The age of its dominance has definitively ended. The global superpower devolves into a mere regional player, or worse, it collapses entirely. This was the fate of Rome in 476 AD. It was the permanent state of France after the Second World War. The reality for the USSR in 1991, and a chilling projection for the United States' future 6 distinct stages. 3 empires have traced this exact path to ruin. For Rome, the descent from Stage 4 to Stage 6 took a full century. For France, it took a single year. For the Soviet Union, a mere 2. Each collapse accelerates, happening faster than the one before it. The pattern is undeniable. The sequence is terrifyingly consistent. And right now, the United States is standing squarely in Stage 4. Allow me to demonstrate why. The evidence is simply overwhelming. Stage 1 began in 1991 with the Gulf War. In just 100 hours, the United States military systematically dismantled the fourth largest army on the planet. A display of precision weaponry, overwhelming air power, and absolute battlefield dominance. This was the zenith of American military might. The world had never witnessed such a concentration of force. The doctrine was clear. America could engage in two major conflicts simultaneously and secure victory in both. This wasn't merely a doctrine. It was a proven capability. That was Stage 1. The shift to Stage 2 began insidiously, around 2005. The protracted conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan were becoming a relentless grind. The armed forces were stretched to their breaking point. Materiel was attriting at a rate that outpaced replacement. The defense budget remained colossal, yet funds were increasingly diverted to operations, starving modernization. The F-22 fighter program saw its production run prematurely terminated. The Navy contracted from a force of 600 ships to fewer than 300. The Army reduced its size, yet the official narrative insisted everything was fine. The justification was a supposed increase in efficiency. Technological advancements with a new mantra: quality over quantity. By the year 2020, the nation had entered Stage 3. On the surface, the American military's reputation for invincibility remained intact. Beijing refrained from direct challenges. Moscow proceeded with caution. Our allies continued to place their faith in American security guarantees. The NATO alliance operated on the assumption of American defense. Both Japan and South Korea depended on the American security umbrella. Taiwan held a fragile trust that we would intervene in the event of a Chinese invasion. But beneath the surface, the internal rot was metastasizing. Recruitment goals were becoming unattainable. Consequently, enlistment standards were being lowered. The arsenal itself was aging critically. The B-52 bomber fleet, which first entered service in 1955, remained operational. That is a staggering 70 years ago. We are deploying bombers that predate the grandparents of the pilots who fly them. The Navy had dwindled to 290 vessels, its smallest size since before the First World War. This, while China's naval forces had swelled to over 350 ships. The Army continued to cut its active duty strength, but the illusion of power held. The global consensus remained. American military power was peerless. Then came the cataclysm of August 2021, the culmination of 20 years and $2 trillion spent in Afghanistan. The most technologically advanced military in human history pitted against the Taliban, a force possessing no air force, no navy, no satellites, and no advanced weaponry to speak of. For 2 decades, we had trained, equipped, and funded the Afghan National Army. We assured the world that this force could secure the nation. The Taliban reconquered the entire country in 11 days. 11. The very military we spent 20 years constructing disintegrated almost instantaneously. On August 15th, the Taliban marched into Kabul unopposed. The scenes that followed at the capital's airport were a portrait of pure chaos. Desperate Afghans clung to and fell from departing aircraft as the American military conducted a frantic, disorganized evacuation. A suicide bombing claimed the lives of 13 United States service members. The final C-17 departed on August 30th, abandoning billions of dollars worth of equipment, helicopters, armored vehicles, advanced weaponry, and night vision systems. In our haste, we effectively armed the Taliban with a more sophisticated arsenal than many of our own allies possess. This was the dawn of Stage 4. This was America's Adrianople, the precise moment the chasm between its reputation and its actual capabilities was laid bare for the world to see. We had failed to defeat the Taliban. After 20 years, the outcome was an unambiguous loss. The most powerful military in history, had been defeated by an insurgency armed with a little more than rifles and improvised explosives. And just as with Rome after Adrianople, and France after 1940, and the Soviet Union after its own Afghan debacle, the entire world took notice. Beijing watched, Moscow watched, Tehran watched. And what they all saw was profound weakness. Yet, Afghanistan is not an isolated incident. The warning signs are now ubiquitous. Let us analyze them, because every single indicator that preceded the military collapse of Rome, France, and the Soviet Union is now flashing critical red for the United States. First, the recruitment crisis. The U.S. military is failing to meet its recruitment quotas by a staggering 25%. Second, the aging of its equipment. The B-52 bomber fleet dates back to the 1950s. Its Minuteman III nuclear missiles were first deployed in 1970. The average age of an Air Force aircraft is now 28 years, the oldest it has ever been in the nation's history. Our naval assets are being stretched to their breaking point, operating decades beyond their intended service lives. The USS Nimitz, a carrier that has been deployed for a staggering 48 years, is a case in point. The replacement cycle for our equipment is critically delayed, a direct result of a procurement system that is fundamentally broken, plagued by cost overruns and chronic delays. The F-35 program serves as a prime exhibit. 15 years behind schedule, $183 billion over budget, and yet it remains riddled with operational flaws. In stark contrast, China's naval construction is proceeding at a pace that defies our own production capabilities. They have commissioned 3 new aircraft carriers in the same time frame it took us to complete a single one. The very structure of our forces is contracting. The U.S. Navy currently fields 290 vessels, while China's fleet exceeds 350. Our attack submarine count has shifted from 41 to 49, yet China commands 66, and their production lines continue to churn. A similar erosion is evident in our ground forces. The Army's active duty personnel has diminished from 566,000 soldiers in 2010 to a mere 452,000 at present. The Air Force is operating with the smallest fleet in its entire history, leaving us with a force that is not only smaller and older, but dangerously overextended. The readiness crisis is acute. At any given moment, only 50% of the Air Force's fighter jets are even mission capable. This translates to a grim reality where half of our aerial fleet is grounded, awaiting essential maintenance or repairs. A parallel crisis exists in the Navy, where severe maintenance backlogs are drastically reducing the operational sea time of our warships. In a desperate bid to conserve funds, crucial training hours are being slashed. The consequence is undeniable. Our military's combat readiness has plummeted to a level not seen since the bleak era of the 1970s. The scale of our budget issues is masked by deceptively large figures. The defense budget exceeds $800 billion, an amount that appears massive on the surface, yet the vast majority is consumed by personnel costs and benefits and operational expenses, leaving a mere 20% for vital procurement and modernization. The paradox is that we are spending more to achieve less, a problem compounded by our global commitments. This overextension prevents us from concentrating our power effectively. We project a presence everywhere, but possess decisive strength nowhere. Compounding this, our technological supremacy is eroding. China now fields hypersonic missiles capable of neutralizing our aircraft carriers. As of now, we possess no viable defense against such weapons. Simultaneously, Russia has perfected jamming technologies that can cripple our communications and GPS systems, the very nervous system of modern warfare. The battlefield in Ukraine provides a chilling proof of concept, where our drones are being systematically eliminated. The technological edge that guaranteed American military dominance for 3 decades is vanishing, as other nations rapidly close the gap. In certain domains, they have already surpassed us. This external threat is mirrored by an internal crisis of morale and political will. Suicide rates within the armed forces have reached unprecedented levels, and personnel retention is a catastrophic failure. Our most skilled officers and NCOs are exiting for the private sector, while trust in senior leadership is in a state of freefall. The military itself has become a new front for divisive culture wars. These political schisms are corroding the very cohesion of our fighting units. This is the precise form of internal decay that led to the collapse of the Roman legions and the Soviet army. Yet, the most critical indicator looms. For now, we are sustained by reputation alone. Our allies continue to place faith in American security guarantees, but the first signs of doubt are emerging as they begin to hedge their bets. Observe the evidence. Saudi Arabia is forging new pacts with China. The UAE is procuring weapons from Russia. South Korea is pursuing its own nuclear deterrent, driven by uncertainty about America's commitment to its defense. Across the Atlantic, Europe now speaks of strategic autonomy, a clear signal that they no longer trust in our protection. The very reputation that has deterred our adversaries for 80 years is beginning to fracture. When that reputation shatters completely, we will enter Stage 5, the cascade. This begins the moment our adversaries conclude that American military power is a hollow shell. At that point, they will test our resolve everywhere at once. China will make its move on Taiwan. Russia will push deeper into Ukraine or the Baltics. Iran will blockade the Strait of Hormuz. North Korea will initiate action against the South. And America will be unable to respond to all these crises simultaneously. We simply lack the ships, the aircraft, and the soldiers. Our weapon stockpiles are insufficient to sustain conflicts in multiple theaters at the same time. Disturbingly, our own wargame simulations consistently predict a loss against China in a conflict over Taiwan. We have simulated these scenarios dozens of times. The outcome is defeat. Not because their military is superior, but because our logistical capacity to deploy forces rapidly enough has failed. And the moment we lose a single aircraft carrier, the moment China proves it can sink an American warship, the entire illusion of our naval dominance will evaporate. This is not a hypothetical pattern. It is unfolding in real time. We are currently in Stage 4. The withdrawal from Afghanistan served as our Adrianople, the moment the world witnessed that the formidable American military was a shadow of its former self. Stage 5 is now on the horizon. It will be defined by simultaneous challenges across multiple theaters, by allies abandoning our security guarantees, and by adversaries acting with impunity. And it will be defined by America's own discovery that it can no longer defend all its commitments. Consider the timeline. Rome endured for 32 years between its defeat at Adrianople and the final sack of the city. The USSR fell within 2 years of its Afghanistan debacle. France surrendered just 6 weeks after being invaded. The pattern shows that this process accelerates with each historical iteration, driven by the increasing speed of the modern world. Today, information is instantaneous, and adversaries can coordinate their actions on a global scale. The question, then, is how long does America have? Perhaps 5 years? Perhaps 10. But the trajectory is unmistakable. And once Stage 5 ignites, Stage 6 follows with terrifying speed. Because the moment the cascade is triggered, as allies waver and adversaries press their advantage, the empire's global posture becomes untenable. Outposts are shuttered, commitments are forsaken, the military is forced into a desperate retreat to the homeland, and the era of American global hegemony reaches its terminal point. This outcome is not preordained, yet averting it demands a feat no declining power has ever achieved: to admit the systemic weakness, to accept the brutal reality, and to fundamentally re-engineer its structure before the final collapse. Rome failed this test. France failed. The Soviet Union failed. Each was fatally convinced its reputation alone was an impenetrable shield. They all clung to the delusion of their own uniqueness, and each was disabused of that notion by catastrophic failure. The historical pattern is indifferent to exceptionalism. It is a cold, impartial calculus. Maintaining a global empire is a physical impossibility when its military core is eroding from within. Projecting power across every continent is not feasible with a contracting force. Sustaining readiness is futile when equipment verges on obsolescence and recruitment pipelines run dry. One cannot depend on a reputation once that reputation has been proven hollow. 3 times, this exact pattern has annihilated military superpowers. Rome, France, the Soviet Union. Each was seduced by the illusion of its own military permanence. Each willfully ignored the escalating warning signs of decay. Each mistook the shadow of its reputation for the substance of its capability, and each disintegrated when reality finally rendered its judgment. The United States is now tracing this exact historical path, exhibiting the very same symptoms, the same institutional denial, the same inexorable trajectory. We are now in stage 4 of a 6-stage process. The Afghanistan withdrawal was the clarifying event, the moment of stark revelation. Stage 5 is the cascading series of defeats. Stage 6 is the definitive conclusion of American military dominance. The critical question is not whether this will occur. The historical model dictates that it will. The question is the velocity of the collapse, and whether anyone possesses the will to confront this reality before it is irrevocably too late. If this analysis has provided a more sobering perspective on where American power truly stands, then subscribe. Because when Stage 5 commences, when the cascade truly begins, you will need to comprehend the mechanics of what is happening and why. The blueprint is etched into the annals of history, and history's verdict is coming due.